All right, so this is our final run-up and guidance for the CAPM, how you need to study. So you need to know the finite number and details of processes in every knowledge area. So in integration, you got to understand the flow. We've talked about that. You develop the charter, then the plan, then you're directing and managing the project work based on the plan. While that is happening, you're collecting lessons learned. Then you're monitoring and controlling the work of the project. Then you're dealing with change requests as well, which could happen at any point. And lastly, you're closing out the project or phase. All right, so do stop me if anything I'm saying doesn't make sense. So that's
I don't understand why from
so
so
like
integrated change control, that's part of that as well. The integration.
yes, yeah, it's all so everything in this line is part of integration. Everything on this
Yeah,
line,
makes sense.
yeah, is part of integration. So integrated change control is where you're managing the change requests. Yeah. All right. So let's move into scope. Scope management. There are 6 things that happen. Again, you got to know it finitely. You got to know it real crystal clear. What are the 6 things in scope management? So first one is plan. How are we going to manage scope? Plan scope management. Second one is to collect the requirements for the project. The third one is to define what needs to be done work-wise to get those requirements satisfied. So that's defined scope. That's defining the work to be done. Then we have create WBS, and that's where we have like the family tree structure of details on the project where we can see what happens at the parent level and what's happening at the child level. And the WBS work breakdown structure just gives clarity on the scope. Okay. Then we have validate scope, where your customer is inspecting the deliverable. Your customer is going through the deliverable to decide if that meets their needs or not. And lastly, we have control scope. So even though control scope is written last, it happens all throughout where you're trying to prevent people adding extras. That happens all throughout the project, preventing the addition of extras. That's control scope. Okay. Any questions on scope?
So again, validate scope is basically making sure that everybody is okay with what is being presented.
No. Validate scope is your customer checking the deliverable to say,
Gotcha.
yes, this is what we wanted or not. And if they reject the deliverable, you got to make a tweak and then you do validate scope again until they agree.
And that would be then part of control scope, like adjusting
Yeah,
after.
so control scope is different. Control scope is when you are preventing gold plating and scope creep. So if someone is trying to make an unauthorized change, you're going to catch it in control scope. But to your point, if the customer wants a change, it is part of funneling that change through control scope formally and then up to integrated change control. That's why we have integrated change control in integration, because if your customer is asking you for a change in scope, it is not only scope that change is going to affect, right? It could affect other things. So this is how you need to think about changes in this PMI's world. This is where all the changes are integrated, but changes could happen here.
Oh,
It could happen here. It could happen here. So integrated change control is where you're looking the grandmaster view. Okay, I know you want a scope change, but have you considered schedule? Have you considered cost? Have you considered quality? Have you considered resources, communication, risk procurement? Have you considered all those areas? And if the answer is no, then you as a project manager in integration, you integrate it so that every impact has been analyzed before you go ahead. Make sense?
yes, I understand that. Yeah, that makes
Cool.
sense.
All right. So that is scope at a high level. Let's go to schedule. So schedule management, there are 6 things here as well. The first one is always usually plan how to do this knowledge area. So plan schedule management is planning. How are we going to develop the schedule? Oh, we're just going to use Excel. Okay. How are you going to develop the schedule? We're going to use monday.com. Okay. Then when you get into monday.com, what are the things you do? Well, you define the activities, you list them out, you sequence them, you join them in sensibilities of what is first, what is next. Then you estimate, okay, how long will this activity take? And when you do all that, you should have a coherent schedule. Start dates, finish dates, the dependencies and all that. And then the final thing you do as a project manager is you control the schedule. That means prompting people when their tasks are coming up. That means making sure that no one is blowing past the deadline, making sure people are on track. And that's it. Does it make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's really, yeah, that's, I think schedule is quite straightforward. Makes
It is, isn't it? Yeah. All right, let's go on to cost. So for cost, again, the general question is, how are we going to manage cost on this project? So the first thing is to plan cost management. And you have a cost management plan that says, in order to manage costs, we're going to have the team decide how much everything is. Then we're going to run it through some approvals, blah, blah, blah. Whatever the plan is, you follow the plan. So the first thing you do after planning is you estimate how much each line item will cost, and then you roll them up into a final total, and that's determined budget. Estimate cost is estimating how much each task will take. Determined budget is rolling up all of those task costs into a final total, which is the budget. And of course, as you're doing that, you got to think about contingency reserves. And you also want to encourage management to consider unknowns, which means management reserves for unknowns, contingency reserves for things that you already know could go wrong. And then the final thing is you're going to control the cost. The big thing in PMI's world of controlling cost is being aware of the 4 earned value metrics. So we have SPI, SV, CPI, and CV. All of these start with earned value as far as the formula is concerned. So SPI equals earned value divided by planned value. So they have a mnemonic, someone else's problem, SEP. Someone else's problem. This is subtraction, where we have a schedule variance. It's a subtraction because variances are all about difference. Indices are all about division. So the same thing for CPI, it's earned value first. Because it's an index, you're going to divide its cost performance index. So you divide by actual cost. And then for cost variance, it's the same variables, just a subtraction. So you got to remember these for your exam because you could get questions, earned value questions, and those are the low-hanging fruit. So spend a little bit of time trying to recall these. It's going to pan out in the long run, going to be helpful. Okay. When it comes to the indices, they don't have a $sign, but the variances do have a $sign because it's just a straight difference. All right. So that's it for cost. Any questions?
Can you hear me?
Now I hear you.
Perfect. So, so this is basically if the CPI is above 1 or 1, then you're golden.
Yes.
And if it's below 1, then it needs to be adjusted, or it's you lose money basically, right?
You got it. Absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
and this is something to remember, and that is part of one of the 5 process groups, or what?
Yeah, it's just control cost, specific to control cost. Yeah.
Okay. One thing that I always like, I always get wrong: plan cost management, plan quality management, and quality. So that's, And for example, I think I kind of started to understand it for plan schedule management. So that's basically on a higher level, okay, how as a company do we want to approach this, and then approach it, right? So for
You got
example,
it. Yeah.
plan quality, plan schedule management, and then it would be, oh, we're going to use monday.com as a schedule management, and then start with the rest. And then
You got
cost
it.
management, plan cost management, oh, we're going to use QuickBooks, and we're going to use this PO process, and then we start doing it, right? So that's
Right
what
on
was
the
the
money.
first thing. Okay, perfect.
Right on the money. I'm glad you got it, man. You're right in the wheelhouse. And they're all pretty much like that. You know, it could be, how are we going to do it? What software are we going to use? How detailed do we want to get? You know, quality management is the same. It's going to be, what are the standards we need to adhere to? So in America, it's OSHA. In Canada, they've got their own like health and regulatory and safety standards. So for you guys in construction, what is the safety standard? It's got a name. I can't remember. I know that.
I think WorkSafe BC.
Okay, then that would be it. And then the question would be, how are we gonna uphold this? How are we gonna adhere to this? Are we gonna have audits? Are we gonna have some sort of inspection? Are there ad hoc inspections? What are the penalties of us not adhering to this? We better make sure we do it, and here's how we're gonna do it. So plant quality management is pretty much that. How are we going to adhere to standards? And then for you in construction, it could be, how are we gonna adhere to the codes? You know, and so on. So you gotta talk about that up front, and then you gotta ask, how are we gonna check our work to make sure our work
Gotcha. So basically plan quality management, and then while that you would be like, okay, there's a certain building code that we're going to follow, and because of that
yes,
we need a certain knowledge, and so somebody can actually check it.
exactly.
Gotcha.
And then we uphold prevention rather than cure, which means as you're building, you have someone shadowing or making sure that you are doing it right. Just kind of looking over your shoulder that you're following the right process, no matter how good you are. You know, people are, oh, we've been doing this for 100 years. No, there could be some small errors in the work itself. We're not looking at the final deliverable. We're just looking at your work practices. So managed quality is all about the process, your building process, your assembly process, whatever that might look like. So there's a difference between inspecting the process versus inspecting the product. Doing a final walkthrough is too late by then, because what if you got it wrong as you were building? That's why we want audits. So managed quality is where you have these audits. You're auditing the process. You're seeing that someone he wasn't harnessed as he was climbing up this scaffold or something. He had no harness, and then the possibility of falling to his death. Then you got to make the correction. If you do an audit and find that someone's violating the process, then you got to make the correction. So managed quality comes before control quality for a reason. It's like checking as the food is being cooked, as opposed to tasting the meal and saying, tastes like garbage. Well, you should have made sure you were following the right process. So that's the general idea about quality. You plan, what do we need to adhere to? Then you manage quality by doing audits and checking the process. And lastly, when the deliverable is finally produced, you check the product, and hopefully it's good. But if it's not good, you got to do it again. And control quality is where you, the builder, you're doing your inspection before the customer does theirs. Or if it's a product, you're doing your inspection of the product. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I understand that. That makes a lot of sense. It's really applicable, right? So
cool. All right, so let's go over to resources. So the area of resources, you're first of all going to plan, how are we going to manage resources? How are we going to acquire them? How are we going to develop them? So it's a how. It's a how for everything else. How are we going to estimate the resources? It's a complicated project. Okay, this is how we did it on a previous project. This is how we got the right number of people. So let's do this to estimate the resources. to acquire the resources, let's look to agency X or Y, let's look to this staff augmentation firm, or let's look to a sister firm to get people we need, or let's look at contractors, whatever your strategy is going to be. And then develop the team is, oh, we need people to be trained. So how are we going to train them in-house, or are we going to send them out for training? And then how are we going to manage them? So plan resource management is planning. How are we going to do all these steps? Then, as you said, we do it. You plan how you're going to do it, then you do. So after you've planned, you estimate the resources, human, equipment, materials, supplies, facilities, everything. Then you acquire the resources. Then for the humans, you develop the team building, training, offsites and stuff like that. And then you manage the team by leading them, giving them feedback, helping them see how to optimize, get better. And lastly, this one is only for the physical resources, control resources. That's where you're checking to make sure the resources were used as planned. That's it, really.
Gotcha.
All right, let's go to the next one. Next one is very straightforward, it's communication. So you plan, what do we need to communicate? Why? When? And actually, you can use this model I'm about to give you for all of the knowledge areas. I just call it the 5 W's and the H. And you can use this for the plan, whatever knowledge area management. So it is the what are we doing? Why? When? Who? Where? I should put that in order. What, when, where, why? What, when, where, why, who, and how. What are we doing? What are we doing for scheduling? When are we doing it? Where are we doing it? Why? Take that and apply it to any of the planning processes. So now we have communications. What are we communicating? When are we communicating it? Where is there like a place this document is going to live? Or are we going to meet in a client's office? Why are we communicating this? We're communicating it to keep them up to speed. Who is going to do the communication and how? So the vehicle, is it going to be email? Is it going to be phone call? Is it going to be text? All that stuff. If you think about the 5 W's and the H, that explains every single planning process. So this should be accounted for in every planning process, whether it's schedule or cost or something else. So when you understand what you're going to communicate and all that jazz, then you actually go ahead and you communicate. So this is managed communications. I know it doesn't sound like you're communicating, but this is actually the process where you are doing the communication. So you could be in a meeting, giving status, that's managed communication. You could be sending out an email, that's managed communication. You could be having a reporting meeting where you're showing big old charts and graphs, that's managed communications. And lastly, we have monitor communication. This is where you look in the rearview mirror and you say, did we do a good job communicating, or are we doing a good job? And if you're not doing a good job, the survey from the customer says, no, we're not happy, then you got to change something to get better, to get a more favorable report. That's really it in a nutshell. Does it make sense?
Yep, I think, yeah, straightforward as well, I think, communications.
Cool. All right, so let's go to risk. Risk is the one that's a 7-headed beast. So there's 7 in it. It's a bit tricky, but if you understand the 5 W's again, so let me back out there and just borrow the 5 W's here. So if you understand what are we doing for risk management, when are we doing it? Oh, we're going to meet every 2 weeks to talk about risk. Okay. Where are we going to do it? Is there a location? Oh, we're going to do it in the conference room. Why are we doing this? To manage uncertainty. Who is in charge of this aspect? Project manager. How are we going to do it? Well, we're going to do identify, qualitative, quantitative. So you give the steps of how you're going to do it, and then you do it. So for this one, the very first thing you're going to do is plan how we're going to manage risk. We're going to use a risk register. Okay. What else are you going to do? We're going to have a risk matrix, yada, yada. Then you identify the risks. You document what could go wrong on the project. You put it into a register. Then you analyze it from a qualitative standpoint. If you remember, when we were learning risk, I said for identify risk, you got to identify the cause, the risk, and the effect. Don't just identify the risk. That will not give you a good output. You want to identify, in addition to the risk, what could cause the risk and what would the effect be. That's still part of identify risk. But then when you have this good information, you can then do an analysis, a qualitative risk analysis, and you could say, on a scale of whatever that is, 1 to 5, what is the probability rating? And someone says, on a scale of 1 to 5, it's a 3. On a 1 to 5 scale. Okay, what is the impact? Someone says it's a 4 on a 1 to 5 scale. Then you multiply these two together, probability times impact. So you have a 3 times 4, and that gives you a 12. So now you've seen that your risk in this example is a 12. So you're going to score all of the risks, and then you're going to, that's a qualitative risk analysis. You score all of them, and then you rank them. And then you have some risks that are bigger than others. For those that are significant, or those that your company has decided, oh, we're going to take action on anything above a 12 or anything above a certain threshold, then you go a step further in some companies and you do a quantitative risk analysis where you look at the monetary impact. So you say, okay, I see that the score is a 12, but how much money does that mean if it happens? And what is the probability of it happening? So you get more specific and you say the probability in percent is, there's a let's say 60% chance that it could happen. And the impact in dollars, if the impact in dollars is 50, then you now find what we call the risk magnitude. It's called the risk magnitude. It's also known as the expected monetary value. Big words, but expected monetary value. All right, so it's one of these calculations that happens in risk management, and then you just multiply probability times impact, same way you did it for the risk score. So it becomes a 0.6 decimal times $50, which will give a $30. And that's really what quantitative means. It just means taking a look at the probability in percent, the impact in dollars, multiplying them. How do you get this data? From the experts who are doing the work. So someone who has been constant in this field of business, whichever field you're in, they should be able to give a high level estimate of probability and, impact. Or you should be able to do some quick research to find out, okay, broken bones, or some instances people, they die. So you got to find out what happens, what's the liability. If one of our employees, if this happens, you got to be ready to deal with such stuff. So that's more like quantitative. And then lastly, you have the planned risk responses. So someone could say, no, no one's going to die. We can't do that. We absolutely have to avoid that risk. Okay, how do we avoid it? By doing this, or you take the measures, because no one wants that to happen. One of my clients in Boston, they had this problem a few times, and they're like, no, 0 fatalities. We've had it with this. We're going to do everything possible to avoid. So every day they put their notice of 500 days without having a fatality. They have a health and safety check. They go through routine and protocol all the time, make sure people are wearing their hard hats, make sure people are harnessed when they're doing stuff high up, and all that stuff. Okay, and then you implement the response. So you don't just plan what to do, you actually implement all those things. And lastly, you monitor the risk to make sure, okay, this risk was showing as a 60%. Is it now higher? Is it lower? Has it passed? Have we passed the period where this could happen? So you're constantly monitoring to make sure things are as they were, or if they're worse, you update and you take action accordingly. So this is a big one. Does it make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's again quite like applicable to, like, for example, especially construction. And I think I always think like qualitative more on a like, okay, how severe is it, and then quantitative on how often can it happen. But what I hear here is quantitative is actually a dollar value, right?
Yes, exactly. Dollar value, or it could even be a resource impact. So if this goes wrong, how many more hours are we
Yeah,
gonna? Yeah.
I got you. Okay, so it's not only on like, oh, so it's also risks for the progress, right?
Yes.
Makes,
Yes.
oh yeah, that's interesting.
You got it. Cool. All right. So just as a quick reminder, because this helps, and I'm not sure if your company does any such thing, but I did share this in the class. Here's a quick reminder of it. It's a risk register, and it just has the cause, the risk, and the effect, and then the categories to classify where the risk is from. Is it a health risk? Is it a safety risk or whatever? And then we have the qualitative, right? Like you said, we just find out what it, if this happens, how bad is it going to be? And then quantitative, we could have a dollar amount there. And then as far as the risk response, for your exam, the real big thing is remembering the response types, because PMI likes their little response types. And if you remember during the class, I said you have two mnemonics for the responses. You have A team and you have easy. And A team, the A, we have avoid, we have transfer, we have escalate.
Oh yeah.
You remember all this? Yeah, accept and
Yeah,
mitigate.
I do know.
Yeah. And then for the easy, we have exploit, we have accept, we have share, we have enhance, and we have escalate as well for the positive. So if you go through these to brush up for your exam, will be good. And that's that. Okay. And then let's go to procurement. Procurement, the funny one, is where we are buying what we need from outside the firm. So if you're looking at your project, the question is going to be, can we do all of this ourselves, or do we need to go get some help, like maybe buying some parts or getting some labor, some external help? So you first of all plan, and part of your planning procurement is something called a make or buy analysis. Make or buy, because this determines whether there's going to be procurement or not. Sometimes you do a make or buy analysis and you're like, no, we don't need to get anything. We can do it all ourselves. In that case, there'll be no procurement. But if you do a make or buy analysis and then you see, oh yeah, we need help, then you go out and do the procurement. And this is where we talk about the RFPs, RFQs, RFIs, request for proposal, request for quotation, request for information, and things like that. And they're all well talked about in the PMBOK guide. So after you're done planning your procurement management and you decide, yes, we are going to buy some parts, so we're going to get a contractor to help us do part of this project, then you go into conduct procurements to actually conduct the procurement to get people to respond to the RFPs, the RFQs, and the RFIs that you have created in your plan procurement management section. So you plan, okay, we're going to go out, we're going to look for people, then you conduct the procurement, then you get proposals back, then you assess who you're going to choose, you award a contract, and after you award a contract, the next step is to control the procurement, which means to ensure you're getting what you paid for, the contractor is on schedule, they're not violating the contract terms, and so on.
That may be part of the scope control.
Yeah, it could be part of scope. So you want to make sure that they are in scope. But here's the thing about procurement is you are wearing a different hat. You're now just a buyer. You're not a performing organization anymore. You're now a buyer. So in their worlds, they got to do all that. They got to make sure they're in scope. You also do, to some degree, as a buyer, need to make sure that they're not giving you stuff you didn't ask for, that they're actually staying in scope. So it's all interconnected, but they're parallel worlds. You got their world. And
Honestly, I feel like most of my, for example, my job is making sure that like trades stay in their scope and they work as of their scope, that all of our deliveries are within their scope. Like, do we have the right hinges on the door for our color scheme? Did we get the right lights, or did we get the right lights delivered? So I think like control procurements and
right.
control scope, I felt like we're like close or related, at least sometimes, right?
Depending, that's very, very correct. And being that it's for client, yes. So you're now like a middleman almost, because you got them doing some of the work that you are actually going to sell to. It's really a client's job, right? At the end of the day, you're going to transition that deliverable. So yeah, you are like a project manager, yeah, in a sense. Yeah. So you have on their end someone who should be watching that, but you also need to watch it too.
Gotcha. Okay.
Cool. All right. The final one is pretty straightforward. This is a no-brainer. We identify the people the project could affect. Then we plan how we're going to engage them. Maybe it's through a water cooler conversation every Wednesday. Maybe it's just ad hoc. Maybe it's scheduling reviews or walkthroughs or just updates. Maybe it's through meetings, right? And then you manage the engagement by making sure they stay engaged. And then you want feedback. How are we doing? Is stakeholder engaged? Is it working for us? If your engagement strategies aren't working for you, then you need to do something different. And that's where in monitor stakeholder engagement, you decide what to do differently. And that's it.
Yeah.
That's the entire story. So for you, as you're studying, what you then need to do is for yourself, Janik, you need to have your own definition of this is what this process is about. This is the output of the process. This is what this process is about. This is the output. And then you got to at least know some of the common tools and techniques that are used for the process as you go through. But I would say take it in chunks. Take as you're taking the quizzes, you're going to find gaps. But I would say just go through one sweep of integration, one sweep of scope, then you put more coat of paint on your next go round. Then more, because it's all going to come together progressively.
Okay.
So just do what you can. And if you get stuck or if you have any questions, I'm available. Just send me a message. I'm traveling out to Texas today, but I'm going to be checking to see how you're getting along. Just let me know.